Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker podcast. I'm joined today by a very special guest to kick off a new Hoops podcast that we're going to be doing for the 2020-2021's NC State basketball season. It's Brian Geisinger, basketball analyst. He's a co-host of Sports Channel 8 here locally in the Raleigh area on 99.9 The Fan. He's also a writer at ACCsports.com. He's a co-host on the Buzz Beat podcast covering the Charlotte Hornets. He's a basketball guru. This guy covers NBA and college basketball more than I think anybody in the state of North Carolina. So we're very privileged to have a co-host like Brian Geisinger this year to cover NC State hoops. So Brian's joining us here today. And before we introduce Brian and get into our podcast here to talk about the 3 games NC State has played this year and what's ahead for the Wolfpack in this crazy 2020-2021 season, this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there has never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you are guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 5-star reviews. Give Hunter Clausen a call today at 480-513-3992 or email Hunter directly at hclausen@jfqlending.com. That's HCLAUSSEN@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending, Inc., Equal Access Lender, licensed in over 40 states, www.jfqlending.com. And while you're at it, head over to thewolfpacker.com and use promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. Just got done writing some report cards for all of NC State's basketball roster from what we've seen in these first 3 games here. We were hoping that there would be more to this point when we had Brian on the show. We had planned to have Brian on to discuss what NC State looked like against UConn up in Bubbleville, and of course the anticipated Big Ten ACC matchup in Ann Arbor against Michigan. But of course, those games were canceled. Michigan to this point has been officially postponed, although that's at this point it seems impossible that game will be rescheduled because Michigan since rescheduled its final non-conference slate against Toledo, and that game was played yesterday on Wednesday when NC State was supposed to be playing Michigan. So that makes 4 games now because NC State started a pause to its program as of yesterday on Wednesday, which means that the upcoming game that was scheduled against Florida Atlantic that was supposed to be played in Reynolds Coliseum on Saturday, December 12th, was canceled. That marks the 4th game this season on NC State's schedule that has been either canceled or postponed due to COVID-19 problems. Of course, the first game that was canceled was William and Mary. There was a positive test in the Tribes program up there. And then NC State had 1 positive in its traveling party when it went up to Bubbleville. It played 1 game against Umass Lowell and then was supposed to play UConn that Saturday. But early Saturday morning, it was a little bit after midnight on Saturday morning, that the program announced that game would not be played, that the Wolfpack were going to be heading back to Raleigh. And of course, the program was paused 2 days later. So we will wait to see when NC State will return to action. Right now, its next scheduled game is next Wednesday at Louisville to kick off the ACC conference slate. Louisville was also in a pause, but as of today, that pause has been lifted, and it appears that the Cardinals will return to practice this weekend. But we're still waiting to get an update on NC State's status. At the earliest, you could possibly foresee them returning to action maybe Sunday or Monday if all has gone well and everyone is lifted from their contact tracing from the positive last Saturday. But of course, only time will tell because I believe there was another positive and we'll just have to wait and see. So fingers crossed that we do see a game against Louisville next week. But Brian, I think that's kind of a good place to start, just kind of the turbulence of this season so far. Of course, we've had a couple ACC coaches come out in the past week. Jeff Capel up in Pittsburgh made some comments to the Pittsburgh Gazette-Post. our Pittsburgh Post-Gazette rather. And then Coach K, after the loss to Illinois in the Big Ten Challenge, expressed his concerns about how the season has gone on so far. So, Brian, I know it's been a busy time for you because, as you mentioned before we started this podcast, there has been a lot of basketball to watch, and that's even with all of the cancellations and postponements. But, right now, sitting here at December 10th, with the conference slate starting this weekend, I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of where the ACC basketball schedule stands? And I mean, I guess what, if any, predictions would you have over the next couple weeks as to what we could expect?
Yeah. I mean, first off, you hope everyone with state, as you sort of laid out, Justin, you hope everyone's okay, and that it seemed like there were two positives in the travel party, but you just hope in like the immediate short term that everyone's all right. Everyone's got home and is safe, and is getting care, and the care that's needed, and being isolated. The season's been crazy, just like totally disjointed. Games getting postponed or canceled, or even sometimes the literature of those decisions is like on the fence. The NC State Michigan scenario is a perfect example of that. But even the Louisville Wisconsin Big Ten Challenge game that was called off, even there was some sort of minor discrepancies as to what exactly the future of that matchup might look like. And then before you blink, one of those teams has scheduled another game, or you have a team like Stanford that's just been hanging out in North Carolina, like looking for teams to play after the Maui tournaments while they played against, NC Central. So it's wild. It's hard to get a grasp on much of anything. I've really enjoyed the basketball so far. Like, it's been terrific entertainment. Even though it's not the same without fans, and um over everything that's happening on the court, like everything else this year, there's just this sort of like curtain of dread hanging over everything, just knowing that this is risky, and then it could all go pop at any second. But as far as like forecasting ahead, like no clue. It does seem like they're gonna play this season, right? And there's going to be an NCAA tournament. It just depends on when will that event take place, right? And right now, we know the dates for the ACC season, we know the dates for the ACC tournament, and we can, sort of plan out from there the NCAA tournament, and assuming that they're going to get it done in one city, perhaps Indianapolis. But I think there are Coach K having some strong words. Jay Billis now on back-to-back nights having strong words during his broadcasts. Those are two of the sort of like the leading voices with the men's game. Duke women's coach Kara Lawson even had some strong comments the night after Coach K spoke out. Who knows if those two things are connected or not, but two big voices from Duke like that coming out. That carries a little bit of weight. So I guess there's a chance that they could somehow pause the season, reassess, let people go see their families for a little bit, and then have everyone get on the same page for some type of conference play, hopefully with a vaccine that's starting to become more and more distributed, and just what benefits could that happen. And then maybe you have the NCAA tournament later in the year, because you need the revenue that generates. You lost a third of it last year. You were able to maintain two-thirds of it because of the insurance policy, but it's still, these are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. And that tournament keeps the lights on for a lot of other sports in college. So I think they're going to get it done one way or the other. If I had to bet, I guess they're just going to keep staying the course with where they're at right now, and just they're going to try to get in as many games as they can. And I don't know. It's scary and risky, but if they're going to have the season, there aren't too many good ways to do it. I think you sort of have like these two options with different permutations off of it, though.
And as a reminder, we're being joined by Brian Geisinger, ACC basketball analyst. And if you want to give him a follow on Twitter, it's at @bgeis_bird. That's at @bgeis_bird. Brian, I echo your sentiments. Of course, the first hope that comes to mind when you hear about these positive cases is that you hope that everyone involved is healthy and safe and being taken care of. And of course, their families and everyone that's been around them in the program. But, it seems that, we were kind of we were in the same place of uncertainty before the football season happened. And then here we are, approaching the conference championships in another week. It looks like conference championships and the college football playoff are going to go off. I don't think anybody's doubting that those things are going to happen. But all in all, based on what we've predicted before the college football season has actually played a lot more games than I think any of us really expected. And I think that's given us, somewhat of a false confidence going into basketball season. And, I think what we're seeing now with all the turbulence in college basketball, it's simply a numbers game. I mean, we're looking at smaller roster sizes. You're looking at a game that's played in an indoor venue versus an outdoor stadium. And it's really, it's not just the cases themselves. Obviously, you hope that nobody gets COVID-19, but then it's the contact tracing after that. It's just so much harder to keep guys away from each other for extended periods of time. I mean, we see these socially distant benches and everything, and we see everyone wearing masks to the best of their ability. But then, you call a timeout, everybody huddles up. And as you've seen, as anybody that's watched college basketball has seen this year, the masks stay on sometimes, and then they become chin diapers in the heat of the moment because these coaches are yelling out onto the court and they get into the heat of the moment. So, I think everyone's doing the best they can, and it's just going to be a matter of, week by week, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I agree with you that they're going to find a way to have an NCAA tournament. I don't think there's really any other choice but to have one. It's just a matter of how we're going to get there. You raised a good point on, I was listening to your BuzzBeat podcast on my way to work this morning, and you were talking about with the guys there that you had talked to David Teal, one of the ACC gurus, scheduling gurus. And there was some conversation about, what if you played like 2-game series in the conference slate to minimize travel and all that stuff. And I guess, the television contracts kind of shot that down because there wasn't a lot of interest there. And I thought that was an interesting point. That might be something that is revisited if, we see a lot more of these cancellations and postponements, because I think anybody would agree that some basketball is better than no basketball. So, the crossing our fingers hasn't really been working thus far. We in the media will continue to cross our fingers because this is how we make a living. We want to see these games played, and we want to see these athletes have an opportunity to compete safely. So we'll see how it goes from there. But go ahead.
I did think like Teal came on with Hayes and I a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a little over a month ago or so. It was basically right after the conference schedule came out. And that surprised me because my assumption is for live televised sports, the networks, the conferences, the advertisers, the powers that be, I just assume they just want inventory, right? That they just want live sports inventory. It doesn't matter like what teams are playing, where the game, it could be Clemson and NC State having playing a doubleheader on the moon. It doesn't matter, right? Like it's just we're going to put cameras in there and we're going to put it on ESPN or the ACC network, and X number of people are going to watch. So I just assumed they wanted inventory. And we've seen with smaller conferences, like the Big South, for instance, is doing this, like where the league at High Point, UNC Asheville, Campbell, who NC State's playing, is scheduled to play relatively soon, right? Isn't that game
next Saturday?
The 19th. But they're doing that too, where it's like High Point will travel to Asheville. They'll be there for 72 hours and they'll play 2 games and then they'll drive back. And then High Point will host, another team from the Big South, and they'll be in High Point for 2 or 3 days and play 2 games and then get out of there. If a bubble isn't feasible for whatever reason, that is something that seems to, you're at least just building like layers. There's less travel. It's the same people being around one another. And so again, if short of a vaccine or short of a bubble, like your best options are to build as many layers as you possibly can. And then just circling back to like some of the other challenges that college hoops has, you said like it's an indoor sport. there's also 350 teams. Like that's I mean, I know the Ivy's not playing this year, but it's so many teams. It's so like, even compared to FBS football, like that's an ocean in terms of the number of teams that are playing those two sports. And as Jay Billis is one to bring up, and I agree with him on this, and even Coach K was driving this point home the other night, and this was abundantly clear as college football was trying to get off the ground too. Like the NCAA leadership is just absent, right? Like if the college season hypothetically were even to get paused, I mean, that's like a conference decision, right? Like that's something the ACC would have to huddle together and do, I think, because right now it just doesn't seem like there's anyone else sort of like steering the ship out of Indianapolis in the NCAA. So that makes all of these things harder to come to some sort of consensus on and have an actual sort of like groundswell to build support for how they're going to actually finish the season. That's why I think they're just going to keep trekking along until someone would actually hypothetically, step out and say, no, we've got to do something differently.
Well, it's become quite clear that similar to the football season, it's going to be up to the individual conferences to give any type of guidance and have any type of leadership, throughout these next 2.5 months until we get to March. It seems clear that the NCAA is pretty hyper focused on its tournament, which is apparently going to be in a bubble in Indianapolis. So, we'll see how that works. We had you on our regular Wolfpacker podcast back in August, and we, kind of spitballed the idea of having a Greensboro bubble, which to me still seems like the best realistic option. I don't know at this point, it doesn't seem like that would get going if it hadn't gotten going, back in August or September, because just of the amount of logistical organization that would require to have that many people, staying there for an extended period of time. But, something's going to have to change. And, as we kind of mentioned, hopefully there will be more vaccines getting out there. The cases hopefully will go down. So we will see, but let's talk about hoops, because this isn't the most fun thing to talk about.
No.
And hopefully as the season goes along, we'll be able to focus more on hoops.
Would love for that to be the case. I don't enjoy talking about COVID and cancellation. I love talking about basketball.
In my wildest imagination, I never thought when I was starting my career in sports journalism that I would have to be a part-time epidemiologist as well. And that has certainly been a part of the job title here in 2020. So, but NC State has played 3 games to this point. They haven't necessarily been against great competition, probably quad 4 type games, if you want to look at it from an NCAA resume perspective. But, winning lopsided victories against Charleston Southern and North Florida in the Mako Medical Wolfpack Invitational to kick off the season in Reynolds Coliseum. And then the following week, after that William and Mary game was canceled, NC State went up to Bubbleville a little early to play UMass Lowell, which was a team that, I don't think anybody expected them to be any type of juggernaut, but was spunky, had a 10-point game against Ohio State up in Columbus. And of course, everybody wanted to mention how they had beaten San Francisco, which San Francisco then went and beat Virginia, the preseason ACC favorites, I think a couple days later. So, it was a team that had shown that it can compete against some of these Power 5 teams, and NC State really took care of business. I think to date, that was probably their best performance of the 3 games. What's become quite clear early on is that, NC State's been able to force a lot of turnovers. I think in that Charleston Southern game, what Charleston Southern had, it seemed like 1 million turnovers. I think the final count was like 35 or something like that, which is a ton at the college basketball level.
32. It's a lot.
If you're over 20, it's a lot. If you're over 30, then there's like no chance. That's like 5 or 6 turnovers in football is an equivalent.
They turned it over on over 40% of their possessions in that game, which is crazy.
Which, some of that you have to credit NC State's defense, but some of that you also have to credit to, Charleston Southern maybe playing sloppy. And of course they were without the Big South preseason player of the year, Fleming. I'm forgetting his first name, but he was guy that averaged, I think, 18 or 19 points a game last year. And
Philandrous Fleming.
Yeah, he was, I mean, when you're missing your main guy, and I think they had another starter out and had another starter get injured there in the first half. So it was a beat up Charleston Southern team. NC State was a little bit slower to start in those first two games in the first half, but then really turned it on early in the second half and kind of made those lopsided affairs. So at least in the first three games, you've been able to see the complete roster. You know, this is an NC State team that's got 6 freshmen, five freshmen in the 2020 class. And then I would also throw Darion Sebron in the mix there as a redshirt freshman that was sitting on the bench last year. But, you know, from what you've seen so far, I think we should start with Devin Daniels, who seems to clearly be, you know, a guy that's going to be NC State's top scoring threat this year. It seems like he's going to be the primary offense generator. What have you seen from Devin Daniels through 3 games, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, Devin's been awesome to start this season. I mean, he came out on fire against Charleston Southern, and he's just been really, really good on both sides of the court this season. And I thought we saw Devin make a pretty big jump during his second season on the court, third year in the program, but second season on the court with State last year. I thought he became State's best on-ball defender last season, and sort of stop settling for some of the tougher contested sort of like floaters and runners. He still takes, you know, weird and quirky shots off the wrong foot and from tough angles. And, you know, he makes a lot of them, but he just got to the rim with greater volume and frequency last season. And we're seeing that again this year. Like the pull-up shooting is certainly wonderful, but just his ability with his size and his handle to be able to power through and get to the rim. I think his handle looks even better this year. I think it, again, like with everything we're going to discuss today, like, you know, a little bit of an asterisk because the season it's just a 3-game sample and it has not been against great competition. But I mean, the lefty hesitation moves, the crossovers, the hang dribbles, I just think his handle and craft looks exceptionally tight. And you put that with a guy that's got a decent first step and has some size. And yeah, he can be tough to stay in front of. And so far this season, Daniels shooting 64% on twos, including shooting 9 of 12, 75% at the rim. In 85 minutes with Devin Daniels on the court this season, NC State is plus 84, has outscored opponents by 84 points in the 85 minutes with Devin Daniels on the court. And when he plays, State's offense is getting 45% of their field goal attempts around the rim when they're making 66% of those shots, which is a big number. And Daniels, you know, it's not just him doing that, but he is certainly like this team's, I think, most reliable engine in the half court. It's great that Braxton Beverly looks healthy and has done, I think, a pretty good job playing on the ball this year. And obviously we'll probably talk about Cam Hayes, and he's been fun, and he's shown some pretty encouraging flashes offensively. But Daniels is like there in terms of, you know, usage and scoring and guy that's going to get to the rim and get to the free throw line. Like he's the guy for them in the half court this year.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you know, Daniel, really the whole team, NC State's roster has been shooting lights out from the perimeter, which is, you know, kind of uncharacteristic, particularly when you look at last year. You know, one of the big questions entering this season is how are you going to replace the offensive production of senior guards Markel Johnson and CJ Bryce from last year? You know, I know Markel struggled with his 3-point shot last year, but he was still a go-to guy when NC State needed a triple. And then CJ Bryce was one of the leading perimeter shooters and had a really nice mid-range game. So that was kind of a question. I think, you know, that is something that I know it's been a brief sample size, but so far, you know, NC State seems to have a recipe for, you know, replacing that production in the backcourt. You know, Beverly now healthy without a bad back. You know, he couldn't even sit down on the bench during ACC play due to fear of back spasms.
Yeah.
This 8 months, you know, rest for him seems exactly what the doctor ordered. He looks like a new look player when he's healthy. And, you know, he's run a little bit of point. I know Keats has started him in the first 3 games. We're going to get to Cam Hayes, the freshman point guard, who I think will ultimately take the keys to the offense once NC State gets into the conference stretch. But, you know, Daniels shooting 42.9% from the perimeter. He's taken the most attempts too, 6 of 14. That wasn't really a characteristic aspect of his game last season. You know, you look at a guy like Jericho Helms, who's, only shot 7 threes, but he's made 5 of them. He's shooting 71.4%. And then, add in Braxton Beverly and Thomas Allen, who are both shooting over 66% right now. So, is, from your interpretation, is that a matter of just, lesser opponents on defense, or is that an encouraging sign that this NC State team could take a step forward in the perimeter game?
I do think it's encouraging. I mean, one thing, it's encouraging. I do think it is, but I think it could also be a little bit of small sample size noise, right? Like they've played 120 minutes of basketball total this season, but there are some things that I think you can look at and say, oh, no, that is legit, which is we have 3 years of data that says Braxton Beverly is a good 3-point shooter. I know he struggled at times last season, and obviously the back was a serious concern. But Braxton Beverly is like a high volume, efficient 3-point shooter. He has been since he got to Raleigh. So you have that guy back, and you do have, he's not he's not Scott Wood. Very few NC State shooters are that blend of size and high volume 3-point efficiency. But he can do similar things, fill in the wing and transition. And just spotting up around State's pick and roll. Like State doesn't run a lot of off-ball actions, but they run a ton of spread pick and roll. And the way that works out is you need guys like Jericho Helms and Braxton Beverly that can spot up and knock down shots. So having Beverly back just as like a spacing agent for this half-court offense is a big deal. You brought up Markelle. I was worried about their half-court offense without Johnson this season, just because the last 3 years since Keats got to town, like the offense has ran through number 11, right? Like it was Markelle had the ball, he's dominating the ball, and he was going to shoot or pass to the guy that was going to shoot, right? Like that was his usage and assist rate both off the charts. And State's offense last year it took a bit of a nosedive when Markelle sat. But I think in part because like the personnel around Markelle he was the one ball handler, right? And so when the one ball handler sits, now you're looking around and saying, well, maybe Devin can handle it or CJ. And so it was a little bit by committee when Markelle sat. And so I was worried how that would translate to this year. But Devin Daniels, I just think he's gotten I think the handle is better. Beverly's healthy. He looks like he's able to play on the basketball a little bit more. We'll talk about Hayes, but I would also just keep in mind, like when you're watching Devin Daniels operate in the half court, keep an eye on where he like catches the ball. And this is why, like, I think the Daniels and Beverly pairing has worked early this season, because Braxton brings the ball up as a bit of a caretaker, and then they get into their side pick and roll game. And that's when Devin can really light people up. And, you give the ball to Devin, cuts across the lane, you give it to him on the left, he opens up, Helms flares to pops and flares to the corner for a 3, and then you run middle pick and roll or side pick and roll with Manny Bates or DJ Funderburk, who are both good pick and roll big guys. And then you space out with Thomas Allen and Braxton Beverly, who are on the weak side, who are good shooters, and like that's hard to guard, and all of a sudden you got the court spread with a lob guy going to the rim around Devin Daniels handling the basketball, and he's pretty darn good at getting to the hoop, as we just discussed. It's also a safe way to sort of avoid turnovers, which has been something that's one of the benefits of playing this heavy pick and roll offense, is that there are fewer turnovers. That's been a key under Kevin Keats. So I think without Markelle, they have, in this small sample, they've adjusted themselves adequately. And I mean, who knows? The shooting's going to come down. Like they're not going to shoot 45% on threes all year, but if they can level off in the upper 30s, like that's a great number, because it's going to keep the floor open for pick and roll.
Well, we all know that Keats' philosophy on defense is force as many turnovers as possible, create points in transition off of those mistakes, but, produce a lot of turnovers, limit your turnovers on the offensive end. Seems like a pretty good recipe for success. So we'll see if that can continue once NC State gets into a little bit tougher competition here, hopefully here later in December. But you mentioned Thomas Allen. I want to talk about him a little bit because, he was kind of a big name in terms of a variable guy that could bring some experience to this team, particularly in the backcourt. I know his name was kind of mention when, Keats was asked about who's going to run the point this year. We all know Hayes is going to be kind of that true point guard, but he's a true freshman and he's going to have some growing pains along the way. So you got kind of a by committee approach to, point guard minutes when Hayes isn't on the floor, which he's yet to play more than I think 22 minutes in a game. So there has been a lot of those opportunities. Allen was one of those guys that was brought up, but I haven't seen him run a lot of point yet. He's been it's good to see him starting off, well, shooting from the perimeter. The scouting report on him is that, he's going to be a really good perimeter shooting threat and that he's going to be able to, get some steals and force turnovers on the defensive end. And so far he's lived up to that, 6 of 9 on threes. He's gotten, I think 5 steals or so, maybe 4 steals. So, he's lived up to that expectation, but, maybe another expectation for him was to be, potentially a low double figure scoring type guy, maybe drive to the basket a little bit more. And we haven't seen a whole lot of that yet. What have you seen from Allen in the first 3 games? And do you think that he will get more aggressive as the season progresses?
Yeah, I think some of that will depend on the health of Beverly and the development of Hayes and Shaq Moore, who, Moore's had some turnover issues and has struggled with his shot, but man, is he athletic too. Like State has a couple really exciting guards that joined the program this year. Yeah, I like Thomas Allen a lot. During the summer, I actually did like a big film dive and I went on Synergy and I pulled up a bunch of his old games from Nebraska. And, he is a lower usage offensive player, to your point. Like he doesn't drive a lot. I mean, the guy, a lot of his game is catch and shoot. And that's still incredibly valuable. Like they need a guy. They need these teams. If Cam Hayes and Devin Daniels are going to play on the basketball, you need guys that can spot up and be secondary attackers. And I think Allen so far has shown his ability to do that. They've run a little bit of that like same side pick and roll action with Allen that they've run for Daniels, but Thomas Allen doesn't get downhill like Devin Daniels can with the basketball. It does not have the same size nor like quite the same like first step explosion that Daniels does. But I think Allen's been great. 4% steal rate. Like you said, he shot well on threes. Those numbers will come down a little bit, but the impression that I got from watching film on Allen this summer while he was at Nebraska was that everyone was talking about what he does offensively, but like he competes defensively. And I think he does a really good job guarding pick and roll. Like, I know that's not like exciting stuff to like talk or think about, but his ability to switch and guard a couple positions. And then his ability when State guards, 1-5 pick and roll with Manny Bates or DJ Funderburk, and they don't switch, Allen's ability to like get over the top of the screen as he's being screened, for his ability to like get over the top and stay attached to opposing ball handlers, I think is pretty darn good. So yeah, I get what you're saying, because I think maybe there's some hope because he's a guard that has some scoring capabilities. Like, could he be a guy that just, cracks the defense off the dribble? And right now I'm just not quite sure that's his game. I think he's more secondary creation. He spots up, you throw it to him. If he's open, if he shoots it, if not, keep the ball moving or pump and maybe try to drive to get to the hoop.
Well, you've mentioned Funderburk and Bates a couple times. I want to get to the front court, but I'm sure the listeners at home are screaming, saying, guys, let's get to Cam Hayes, the freshman, because I know that's been a big name that everybody's wanting to talk about, and he's off to a really exciting start. I think, as good of a start as you could expect from a true freshman that was playing high school ball last year. Yeah. And what's impressed me the most is how mature he looks on the court for a true freshman, playing just his first, second, and third games of his college career. He admitted to having a little bit of first game jitters against Charleston Southern, had 4 points and played some good minutes, quality minutes, but didn't necessarily put up the numbers to back it up. But then in these last 2 games, he's really turned it on. He had 13 points against North Florida, 6 assists, no turnovers. And then up in Bubbleville at Umass Lowell, he scored 17 points, a season high, a new career high in 3 games. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to keep bringing up career highs until he's at least played 10 games. But but he's shooting the rock well from the perimeter. I think he's shooting about 35% on threes. And He had another 6-assist performance against UMass Lowell, only 1 turnover. So you look at his 2-game stretch over the past 2 games, and in 40 minutes, I mean, he's put up 30 points, 12 assists, and just 1 turnover. What have you seen from Hayes, just, from an analytical perspective, and does he look like a freshman point guard to you?
Like you said it a second ago, like it's hard to imagine his start to the season going better than it has. Like he looks the part, he's played well, and the numbers are great, right? But yeah, 58 minutes so far this season for Cam Hayes. State has outscored opponents by 41 points in that time with Cam Hayes on the court, which is a good margin. They've been very efficient on both ends of the court with Hayes playing. 16 assists, 2 turnovers, 6 steals, 5 of 6 shooting at the rim. All 5 of those makes at the rim have been unassisted. So he's flashed a little bit of that shot creation game. And he's 5 of 9 shooting on pull-up jumpers too. And so I think the stuff that's been most impressive for me, outside of just like sort of his like overall comfort on a college basketball court, first thing that stuck out to me are his hands defensively, and why Kevin Keats would see this guy play in high school and just think like, I got to have this guy at the top of my defense. His hands are really, really quick, and you can tell like he can be really a bit of a pest. And I feel like a couple of his steals have come where just guys have been a little too loose with the dribble, either when he's on ball or they're trying to drive by and he digs down from a help assignment and he's able to just poke his hand in and knock it out. And that stuff is really impressive from a freshman. I get that the competition has not been great, but I think that's something you can sort of like isolate and look at and say like, yes, that might translate. Like he could really be a disruptive force for them defensively. And I just think he's done really well in one-on-one situations. And then on the other side of the court, offensively, I think his pick and roll decision-making has been pretty sharp. I don't think he's forced the issue too much. It certainly helps when you're making your pull-up jumpers. Like everything else just becomes so much easier and looks better after that. But I just think his decision-making has been pretty heady. And that was something that was maybe sort of up and down for Markelle. I know not everyone was crazy about what he did with the offense. I thought overall Markelle was a pretty darn good pick and roll engine and operator for State. But when Cam Hayes has been on the court, he has assisted on 45% of his teammates' field goals. That's a big number. And State has scored very efficiently out of the pick and roll when he's played. Like when Cam Hayes either uses a pick and roll and shoots or passes the ball to someone in the pick and roll and they shoot, State is shooting 60% from the field in those situations and scoring 1.36 points per possession. Small sample, but no turnovers have come in those situations either. So you can see just how efficient they've been when Cam Hayes has played in the half court. And I think that, again, it's so early, but I think that's a huge positive indicator for State, because one of the reasons why these games have been tough to judge is not only the small sample, the competition, but because, as you said, State's forced so many turnovers. Like a third of NC State's defensive possessions have ended in a turnover, right? Like literally 33% of them. And so we haven't even seen that much half court activity, but I think Cam Hayes has like, made his presence felt and looked very comfortable and has played efficient basketball offensively for State so far.
And you mentioned his plus minus numbers, and you almost have to they've been impressive, but you have to take them with a grain of salt too. And you expect that those could get better, because a good chunk of those minutes so far have been at times when he's been on the court with 4 other freshmen, when, Keats is just trying to see what he has in some of these younger guys and is getting a little experimental in lopsided games. But, what really sticks out to me about Hayes is, he has a team high 6 steals along with Braxton Beverly, but he looks really engaged on the defensive end. And one thing that jumps out to me, I know NC State fans have kind of had a love-hate relationship with Markelle Johnson over the past 3 years. And, a guy that's, really an offensive, star. But sometimes, on the defensive end, he had a tendency to take some breaks and take some plays off. And at least through 3 games, that doesn't seem to be the case with Hayes. What do you think about Hayes maybe being a potential upgrade on defense at that position?
No doubt. I mean, Markelle was, not only could he sort of ball watch and check out defensively, he was smaller too, right? Like there are just sometimes that they're not like, Cam Hayes is a giant, but it's hard to be that size playing basketball and then to have like some of those tendencies away from the basketball. It can make for occasionally like a tough, or it can give you trouble defensively. And I think Hayes has, we'll see eventually how he fills out. But I think his hand speed, his length, and his attention to detail defensively has been really, really good so far. He can guard a couple positions. I mean, if you play at State and you're a guard or a wing, like you're gonna guard 1 through 4, period. Like they switch all those exchanges off the basketball. So you got to be willing to if you're going to be successful, you've got to be willing to like compete and dig in. And we've seen teams try to like target Braxton Beverly in the post on switches, and like that's something that Cam Hayes is gonna have to be ready for. But no, I think he's looked defensively. His hand speed, I think, has been really impressive because Keats wants to first force turnovers, and it looks like he's finally got really a point guard that might be able to, at the point of attack with his defense, be a force. And the last thing I want to mention on Hayes too is I just like his fit. Like you can play him with Daniels because he can play on and off the basketball. You can play him with Beverly. I do think eventually this team's gonna, like, for them to hit its ceiling, Hayes has to be like, he's gonna have to become their point guard. But even then, like, he's still going to be sharing playmaking duties with Daniels, like no matter what, if he's starting or coming off the bench. But I do like the fit with those guys so far.
I agree with you on that one. I think for NC State to reach its ceiling, which to me, early on, I know we keep bringing up the small sample size in the competition, but from what it looks like, and you look around the rest of the ACC, the ceiling to me of this team is a borderline top 25 team, a team that could get an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament, and a team that, in a year where the ACC is going to be a rat race, a team that could compete for a top 4 or 5 position in this league. I think the preseason poll suggested that NC State's going to come in at 8, but really from 1 to 9, 1 to 10, there's going to be a ton of parity this year, as we've seen so far. But let's talk about the front court a little bit with Funderburk and Bates. Bates puts on, we've heard about this a lot, he puts on 20 pounds of good weight, and he does look like a new look player. He looks bigger out there. He was already an athletic big guy that could run the floor, and we already know that he's an elite shot blocker. But this year, I think the question with him is that, can he take a step forward offensively? And then with Funderburk, a big name coming back. I think that's probably, the biggest name that NC State fans were hoping would come back. He's a 5th-year senior. He kind of he was an NBA early draft entrant, and then officially comes back in August to hopefully improve his draft stock. I know he's tried to work on his shot a little bit, over the summer. At least so far, on the offensive end, it's been a little bit of a slow start. He's missed 4 3-point attempts. I don't really think that's his game. I mean, we'll see. Maybe he's just off to a slow start. But what have you seen from Funderburk and Bates in this front court, and how much can you really take out of these first 3 games, just considering the competition, considering they haven't had to play a ton of half-court offense and get those bigs involved?
Yeah, the last point you bring up there is really good. Let's start with DJ. I love DJ Funderburk. I was trying to. I'm sure that I wasn't alone in this, but last year I was really trying to power the train. The DJ Funderburk is underrated and good train. I thought he deserved more recognition with some of the end of season accolades, because I just thought he was phenomenal for NC State. Since he came back, I don't think he's been like amazing so far this year. The turnovers, no assists so far. I do think even though he has not made a 3-point attempt, I still think it's interesting that he's getting those shots up. Like, and this will be something they're gonna have to figure out as the year goes along. But traditionally under Kevin Keats, State has not played 2 big guys right together. It's usually been 1 big guy, and initially it was Torrin Dorn, right? And that was Helms plays this role now, and Daniels has occasionally filled this role as well, just like the sort of like hybrid wing that has the power forward assignments when matched up with certain opponents. But last season, that was maybe supposed to be Pat Andre, but he just couldn't get right for a couple of different reasons. And Bates became such a force defensively that they they were tasked with playing Funderburk and Bates together because they were two of NC State's, I don't know, 4 or 5 best players, whatever. And so for the first time, State was playing 2 big guys. So this year you have the biggest team Keats has ever played in terms of like average height. This is it. And defensively, Funderburk and Bates were very good together last season. Opponents shot a very poor number at the rim. State's defense allowed, I think, just 94 points per 100 possessions with those 2 guys on the court, which is a great number. And so far this year, defensively, they've looked pretty good too. But the flip side of that is we talked a little bit ago about State's spread pick and roll game in the half court. That can be more difficult to access if you're playing DJ Funderburk and Manny Bates together, right? Like if you're running pick and roll with Manny Bates in the middle of the court and DJ Funderburk is spaced to the weak side, he needs to be a threat from 3, even if we know that's not his game. I mean, he's for 3 years now, he's sort of like flirted with that shot and it hasn't quite gone in. I think it's still encouraging that he's taking it because I think if they're going to play those lineups, because Bates and Funderburk, again, are 2 of their, 5 best players, those guys are going to play together a lot this year. You can stagger them, and that way State can always have one good center on the court, which is a pretty nice luxury. But if they're going to play together, Funderburk's got to be able to like threaten with that shot. And so I think at least having 3 games, he's gotten it up 4 times. I actually think that's like slightly encouraging. It'd be nice if they had gone in, but maybe over the course of the next couple of games, he'll take 4 more and he'll make 3 of them, and all of a sudden it's like the percentages will look a little bit better. But I think it's encouraging that he does that, because when DJ's out there, he's not like a passer, so he's got to at least be able to threaten with the jumper a little bit if he's playing with Bates. And it clearly too, he worked on if you saw any of the like off-season workout videos with DJ, you knew he was working on his face-up game. And I think they've given him some opportunities to work on that. And I think he's looked pretty good in that so far. Like, he's a pretty clever guy with the basketball. When he's going to the hoop, he's got a little Euro step and a little step through move. So anyways, DJ's a great player. I think he's going to be fine, even if the fit with Bates isn't great. And then, man, you know what it is with Manny Bates. Like, he is terrifying to score around at the rim. He's averaging 6 blocks per 40 minutes this season. Again, that's like where he was last season too. Top 5 nationally in block rate. He's blocked over 15% of the 2-point field goal attempts when he's been on the court. Manny Bates has blocked those shots. It's an incredible number. Teams are shooting, I think, right around 40-41% at the rim when Manny Bates is out there. That's a great number. State's plus minus when Manny Bates is out there is a great number. And you can look at some of the splits with and without Funderburk. And if you want to get into those, we can. But I think Manny, like, you can tell, like, he's bulked up a little bit. He's still really raw, I think, offensively, especially, right? Like, he's not ready to like give you a post move and score with any sort of like real consistency. But he can still be a terror, catching lobs in the pick and roll, which is perfect. Give you that vertical spacing. And he can be a pretty impactful offensive rebounder, either just going up and grabbing rebounds or on those little tap backs a la Tyson Chandler that you're seeing Mark Williams at Duke do this season as well. But yeah, State with Bates on the court this season, plus 65 in 57 minutes. And they're a net rating of 71 points per 100 possessions. Like, they're just killing teams with Bates on the court so far this year. And the lineups with he and DJ have been positive and good, just as the lineups with only Bates on the court or only DJ on the court. Like, all of those lineups have been so far so good for State this year. But I've been impressed with those guys. State has a bit of a luxury having those 2 dudes on the same roster.
Well, I think you hit the key with Bates is that, if he can stay on the floor, that makes NC State a much better team. And, it was encouraging because Coach Keats joked after the game in his post game in the North Florida game when Bates had his 1 double-figure scoring night and he was actually able to stay on the floor for the better part of 30 minutes, is that he had his career low 1 foul game, which, it seems like Bates checks into the game with 2 fouls already, a guy that's really struggled with foul trouble, particularly in his first season. And maybe that'll get better as he becomes a more mature player, gets adjusted to the college game and everything. And I doubt that that's going to impact his, block rate and his shot blocking ability, because he's clearly one of the top guys in the country in that category. With Funderburk, let's get a little bit more sample size before we dive in too much on Fundy, because I think it'd be a little unfair to touch on it too much now. When I did my report cards, and if you want to check that out, you can use that promo code PACK60 at thewolfpacker.com. That's a premium story, but I'll give you a spoiler. I gave DJ Funderburk the lowest grade of the veterans so far. And I think that's just because the expectations for him are so high. He's a guy that's really competing to see if, maybe he can get some draft stock after this year. And I think the biggest thing with that is, can he start knocking down that long range shot? So
yeah,
I know he's worked on it. Let's give him a few more games to see if they can start going down. Another thing with him is you'd like to see him get a little bit more involved in the rebounding game. I know that's something that he talked about before the season, that, when he had conversations with scouts, they want to see him be a little bit more aggressive on the boards. So far, I think he's averaging less than 4 a game, but again, small sample size. So we'll give him a little bit more time to get adjusted. The last thing I want to touch on with you, Brian, is the freshman, what you've seen from the freshman other than Hayes. I know we touched it at Hayes at a good amount of length, but you've got Shaquille Moore, who, another 4-star guy coming in, highly touted. We touched on, he's a really athletic guy, a guy that's, ready to compete defensively at the ACC level, but the offensive game is going to be a work in progress. Maybe not going to, expect too big of offensive numbers, at least here in year one. And then you got Darion Sebron, a really versatile guy that can play from the perimeter, can play a stretch 4 in a pinch. And he's 6'7", really lanky, really athletic. He's been really impressive so far. He's been efficient. He's only averaged, I think, 13 minutes a game, but 6.7 points per game. He's knocked down 2 of 3 from beyond the arc. And, a guy that, as you mentioned, another classic Coach Keats, guards the 1 through 4 positions on the defensive end. And then you've seen, some of the younger bigs like Ebenezer Duana, a 3-star coming in from Florida in the 2020 class, potentially a guy that will be that third man if Bates and Funderburk get in trouble, as a, center that you can put in, maybe play 10 minutes a night or so. And then Jalen Gibson, a local kid, that's another 3-star guy. I think he's about 6'10", 6'11", but, maybe wants to put on a little bit of weight to get, super involved in the post. I know he likes to play a little bit from the perimeter, and they see him as a, potentially a big wing or a small ball type of 4 that, sky's the limit for a guy like that. But we've seen them in limited flashes. But what have you seen from those 4 freshmen? We haven't seen much of Nick Farrar, so, I mean, I don't think you can take too much from him yet. But what have you seen from them?
I actually, again, not to beat a dead horse here, but like all this comes with the small sample size and the lack of sort of like great quality Division 1 competition. But I think the freshman class has actually been pretty impressive so far, even outside of Cam Hayes. I know, Jalen Gibson has struggled a little bit with turnovers and very limited playing time. I love his size and frame, and just like I think he could fit into a role. Eventually, could fit into a role similar to like what Funderburk has. Play at a couple different positions, guard, 2 through 5, 1 through 5, 1 through 4, 2 through 4, whatever. But I just like his sort of like rangy size and his versatility. And I right now it's with Bates and Funderburk ahead of him and Helms as well, because he slides around and plays a couple positions. It's not super easy to have a clear path towards playing time, but like as a development piece, I'm pretty bullish on Jalen Gibson. I just like his frame and his bounce and like in a system like States, like what he could do inside of it. With Sebron, same thing. Like I just love his length. He probably needs to bulk up a little bit too. He's pretty skinny, but man, you just these sorts of like rangy wing defenders, guys that can guard a few positions, have the utilize their wingspan, get in passing lanes. Like you just like you can't have enough of these guys, and so I'm pretty bullish on both those guys. What I've seen through only a couple games here so far this season. And with Shaquille Moore, the athleticism is just like undeniable. Like you watch that guy play, and he's just shot out of a cannon so fast. He can absolutely fly athletically. The layup he had in the Umass Lowell game, the late, like what was that? Almost like a 360 sort of like spinning layup that he hit in the lane. That was just filthy. He's clearly got a lot of abilities, but the backcourt is a little crowded, and he's struggling with his shot right now too. So I think as like development pieces, but guys that may be able to help you, be a part of the rotation this season too. Like this was a big freshman class, even without Josh Hall, right? And I think so far, some pretty interesting returns on some of those guys, including a redshirt guy like Sebron too.
Yeah, well, small sample size as you're not going to get more thorough analysis on NC State basketball through 3 games.
My apologies to bring out that like 27 times throughout this. I feel like I couched everything in that. So I apologize if that was for to just be droning on about small sample size, but it is like State's been very impressive so far, and I don't want that to be hidden by just casually bringing up that they've only played 3 games.
It's necessary to bring up. I don't think any of us can expect Jericho Helms to keep shooting over 70% from the perimeter. No. If he's shooting over 70% from the perimeter this year, NC State's a Final Four contender.
Yes.
We'll see. I mean, with the freshmen, you brought up Sebron and Gibson, guys that could really benefit from putting on some weight. And Funderburk, you got to remember a couple of years ago, he was a really skinny guy, and he's his game really took some strides once he was able to bulk up. Of course, Bates puts on that 20 pounds of good weight this offseason. So you've seen that in this program, that once these guys get into year 2 or year 3, they can develop their bodies a little bit more, and the game will kind of follow. I expect the freshmen that we just touched on, probably their minutes to dip once we get into tougher competition. Yeah, the one exception maybe being Sebron is kind of a wild card, versatile guy, just because he can play so many different positions. But it is a real luxury for Keats to have, to be able to really put in a whole fresh 5 of, young, hungry freshmen that are going to compete in the full court press and have shown that they can force some turnovers. So, we'll see. I think there's a lot of signs to be encouraged by if you're an NC State fan, and, fingers crossed here, maybe we can see the first real game of competition next week against Louisville and have you back on so that we can, have that sample size a little bit bigger so we can give some more thorough analysis.
Would love to do that. I've seen every Louisville game so far this year. So they're really good. That's quite the challenge. It would have been nice for State for the Pack to have been able to sort of like flex their muscles a little bit and see just how strong they are against Michigan and UConn. But if that Louisville game does, we're able to play it, that'll be an entertaining game. Louisville's very good this year, very good backcourt with Carly Jones and David Johnson.
Yeah, that was the one thing. I mean, we're really that'll be a true test for this NC State backcourt and Cam Hayes specifically. I mean, we've seen that he can do it against lesser competition. Can he do it against that elite backcourt with Louisville? So only time will tell. But to wrap up this podcast, please be sure to rate, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify, Google Play. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can follow Brian at bguys_bird. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. And of course, follow our main account at the Wolfpacker. Like us on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. And of course, be sure to use that promo code PACK60 on the Wolfpacker.com for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium news content analysis. You can check out my report cards after you listen to this podcast of all the letter grades that I gave to the veterans, and then the freshmen are coming up here later this afternoon or early tomorrow. But Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to do this again soon. Fingers crossed. Everybody stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands so we can have our basketball season. And Brian and I will be back on soon enough. But for Brian Geisinger, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Hoops Podcast.